Today we're going to be talking about LTP, which stands for long-term potentiation. LTP is the way that the connection between two neurons becomes stronger when those two neurons fire together frequently. It's thought to be the way that learning happens in the brain. Because if you think about it, our brain needs to change for us to learn, since everything we know is stored in the brain. And the way we think this happens is not by new cells being grown, but by the connections between cells being strengthened. So again, LTP, the strengthening of connections between neurons that produces learning. When does LTP happen? Well, there's a saying that neurons that fire together wire together. So what that means is when two neurons are often both sending signals at approximately the same time, those two neurons will create an LTP connection. So what that means is, let's say the axon of this neuron is always being stimulated, and then the dendrite of the next neuron is always being stimulated. Axon, dendrite, axon, dendrite. Our brain essentially learns that there's a connection between those two neurons because when one gets depolarized or it has an action potential, then two will almost always have an action potential as well. Note that it doesn't even need to be number one that's causing the action potential in number two. There could be a third neuron entirely that just happens to be always causing the action potential in number two, which we will see. But the point is, so here are some examples of this. Let's say that every time you smell the scent of something baking in the kitchen, you know that that means that something good is going to happen because you're going to get a good baked treat. Eventually, just the smell of that can make you feel happy because the signal between the smell and the signal between happiness is being strengthened, with obviously the in-between being the taste of whatever you get to eat. Or let's say a dog, every time it sees a rolled up newspaper comes out, gets sad or feels bad because it knows it's going to be hit. The in-between is the being hit, but eventually just the sight of the newspaper will make the dog upset or sort of regretful. There are three types of changes that actually occur in neurons when they go through LTP. Remember that the goal of LTP is to strengthen the connection between two neurons. The way a connection is made is that when neurotransmitters are released, then a signal gets sent to the next cell. So one type of connection is that the cell number one, axon, will actually release more neurotransmitters. So if before LTP it released that many, after LTP it might release this many. More neurotransmitters means more signals being sent. Option number two is that cell number two actually grows more receptors. Remember, neurotransmitters are only helpful if they bind onto the receptors of the dendrites of the next cell. So if this is what the cell looked like before LTP, this is what it would look like after. Option number three is that cells can actually grow more dendrites. So remember, this is just one dendrite for this cell, but it could grow a whole new dendrite with more receptors connecting to that cell as well. As those neurotransmitters are released, they'll bind to that new dendrite and make it more likely that that second neuron will fire, which is the whole point. So how does this work in classical conditioning? Well, let's look at the case on the left, which we saw about Pavlov's dogs. Normally, when the dog sees or smells food or eats food, it produces saliva. So that will strengthen the connection between those two. On the other hand, a bell and saliva will have no connection. But let's say that you ring a bell and then give the dog food. Then every time the bell is rung and those neurotransmitters are released from bell, there will be a signal in saliva, not because of the bell, but because it's also getting food. Eventually, there will be a stronger connection between these two cells because bell and saliva seem to go together so often. The same would be true on the right side with a negative stimulus. So every time a rat feels a shock, it will jump. But then, if you turn a light on and then shock the rat, it learns to associate the light and the jump because those two cells were pretty much always active at the same time. So even without the shock, it will jump at the light, much like even without the food, the dog will salivate when it hears a bell. Operant conditioning seems to work that when a signal is released, it causes the activation of those neurons that produce dopamine. For those who remember from the neurotransmitters, dopamine is the neurotransmitter that's often associated with feelings of happiness. It's the one that's stimulated by a lot of drugs, and that's one of the reasons that drugs can become addictive. But in this case, let's say there's something like eating food that releases a lot of dopamine. That's something that you are conditioned to do, although eating food seems to be something that people do automatically. But let's say here that a mouse is looking at different actions that it can take. And one of them is to press a lever. Now, every time it presses the lever, dopamine is released. Not because it pressed the lever, but because pressing the lever gave the mouse food. So it's associating food with dopamine. That's a natural association. And it comes to associate pressing the lever with getting dopamine. For that reason, it keeps pressing the lever. So here, it's basically a motor neuron, meaning a physical choice it can make, causing this release of dopamine, and that's a physical choice it will continue to make because that choice makes it happy. I hope you enjoyed my presentation. If you need to watch it again, feel free so that you can answer all the questions. Bye now.
Made with Doodlecast Pro.